"Pack your things, this just isn't a good fit." The branch manager's dismissal was cold, final, delivered before the young intern's first coffee had even gone cold. He cited culture, a vague alignment she'd failed to achieve in mere hours. What he didn't know, watching from his glass office, was that 3 floors above, her grandfather was watching too, through the boardroom security feed. And he didn't just own the company, he built it from nothing. Her name was Maya Collins, a top business graduate on her first day at the tech giant Nexacor. The manager who fired her, David Chase, saw only a demographic box to check, not the legacy walking through his doors. But this is more than a family revenge story. This is about the quiet bias that dictates who gets to succeed in corporate America, the coded language of culture fit that has sidelined countless young professionals before their careers even begin. The question isn't just what her grandfather will do. It's how deep the rot goes in a company that forgot its own foundation. The founder watching from the boardroom was Silas Vance. In the late 70s, he built Nexacor in his garage, not with venture capital, but with a second mortgage and a simple principle. Talent is universal, but opportunity is not. For decades, his company was a beacon, known for pioneering mentorship programs and blind recruitment drives long before they were corporate buzzwords. But after his semi-retirement a decade ago, a new executive class, led by ambitious operators like David Chase, began a quiet revolution. They spoke of streamlining, cultural alignment, and aggressive growth. The human resources department Silas once championed was rebranded as People Operations, and its focus shifted from development to efficient throughput. David Chase, at 42, was a product of this new Nexacor. He'd risen fast by hitting quarterly diversity hearing targets while maintaining what he privately called team cohesion. To David, Maya Collins was a statistic, a talented one, sure, but primarily a checked box on his departmental report. Her resume was impeccable: valedictorian at a top HBCU, summer internships at Fortune 500 companies, glowing recommendations. But within hours, David felt a disconnect. She asked too many questions about long-term project sustainability during her onboarding. She suggested an alternative workflow in her introductory team meeting. To her, it was engagement. To David, it was friction. It was a failure to assimilate to the Nexacor way. The termination was swift. David called it a probationary release, citing a lack of synergistic fit. He offered no concrete performance failures because there were none. He simply felt in his gut that she wouldn't mesh. This gut feeling, as research from the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission confirms, is where racial bias often hides, disguised as managerial intuition. Studies show Black employees, especially new hires, are 2.5 times more likely to be cited for vague cultural mismatches than their white peers. David saw a problem to be solved. Silas, from 3 floors up, saw his life's work betraying its soul. Silas didn't storm downstairs. That was the old playbook, the expected outburst of power. Instead, he sat in the darkening boardroom, the glow of the security monitor reflecting in his glasses. He watched David return to his office, satisfied. He watched Maya, her composure crumbling only once she was in the elevator alone, and he made a decision. This wasn't about one granddaughter. If it could happen to her, with every advantage of his name hidden, it was happening to others without her pedigree or protection. The Nexacor he built was being used as a machine for a different purpose, one that filtered people out based on the very biases he'd sought to dismantle. He placed a call not to the board but to a retired operations head named Arthur Mill, a man who still knew where the digital bodies were buried. Silas asked for 2 things: access to the anonymized HR data from the last 5 years and the archived doorswipe logs from the executive suite. He wanted to see patterns, not anecdotes. What he began to uncover was a silent epidemic. Promotion pipelines for entry-level hires from minority backgrounds showed a 70% attrition rate before the first promotion. Exit interviews, when they weren't classified as voluntary departure, consistently mentioned feeling isolated and shifting goalposts. Meanwhile, David Chase was being celebrated. A memo from the chief operating officer praised his branch's culture-first restructuring, highlighting improved team satisfaction scores. These scores, Silas discovered, were gathered from surveys sent only to employees who remained after probation, a perfect feedback loop that erased the voices of those pushed out. The system wasn't just broken, it was ingeniously designed to self-justify. It quantified bias and called it efficiency. The cliffhanger came from Arthur's hesitant voice on a secure line. He'd found something else, deeper in the servers, a shadow database. It wasn't part of the official HR system. It was a separate log maintained by a handful of senior managers, tracking what they termed investment risk employees. These were hires, overwhelmingly from diverse backgrounds, who were flagged for extra scrutiny. Their every email, calendar invite, and even cafeteria swipe was being monitored for deviations from core cultural norms. The purpose, according to an internal memo, was to gather defensible performance data in case of early-stage separation. Silas scrolled through the list. He found Maya's employee ID added just that morning. The reason for flagging read, question legacy processes, demonstrates independent pattern potentially disruptive to team harmony. She had been marked for failure before her first lunch. This was the machinery of discrimination, rendered in cold data, but knowing it existed and proving it were different battles. The legal firewall around such internal performance management tools was formidable. If Silas acted now, they would simply delete the database and claim ignorance. He needed irrefutable public evidence. He needed a witness from inside the machine itself. Someone who saw the directives, who carried them out, but whose conscience was still reachable. He knew the fight had just escalated from saving a career to exposing a conspiracy. And the first move required someone on the inside to break ranks. The insider was Liam Park, a 30-year-old data analyst in the People Operations Department. His job was to maintain the very shadow database Silas had discovered. Liam wasn't a villain, he was a cog. A year earlier, he'd been tasked with optimizing the new hire retention forecast model. His supervisor, David Chase, had been clear. Find the early indicators of a bad fit to save the company time and resources. Liam built the algorithm, but as he watched it flag employees, a pattern emerged so glaring he could no longer ignore it. The model consistently highlighted individuals from non-white backgrounds for social network anomaly, a metric based on who they ate lunch with or emailed outside their direct team. Silas's approach was indirect. He had Arthur reach out through an encrypted channel, posing as a researcher studying workplace analytics ethics. They shared a sliver of their findings, enough to show they knew about the investment risk system, but not enough to reveal Silas's involvement. The question was simple: would Liam meet? The bait was a chance to correct a system he knew was morally broken. The risk was his career. Liam agreed to meet at a neutral location, a public library, after hours. He arrived pale, clutching a laptop bag like it contained contraband. "I just built what they asked for," he said, the words tumbling out. "I thought it was about productivity. Then I started reading the annotation notes the managers add." He opened his laptop, pulling up records. Next to an employee flagged for low cultural engagement was a supervisor's note: "Often wears head wrap. Declined after-work drinks citing religious practice. Creates distance." Silas, listening via feed to Arthur's glasses, felt a cold fury. This was the codification of bigotry. Liam provided the key. The system wasn't just tracking, it was manufacturing a paper trail. Every declined social invite, every style of dress noted, every question about policy was logged as a data point. After 30 such points, an automated alert recommended probationary review. Managers like David Chase were then handed a pre-built dossier to justify their gut feeling. But here was the pivot, the moment that reframed everything. Liam revealed the system had a backdoor, a failsafe he'd built in, uneasy about his own work. It created an encrypted, off-site copy of every entry, every modification. The company could delete their main server, but a complete archive existed, time-stamped and unalterable. "I thought maybe a regulator would ask for it someday," Liam whispered. "I didn't think the founder would." With the archive secured, Silas now had proof, but proof alone is a quiet weapon. He needed a narrative. He needed the public to see the human cost. This is where Maya re-entered the story, not as a victim, but as an investigator. Still reeling from her firing, she was approached by her grandfather. He showed her the data. Her hurt transformed into a cold, focused anger. Using her own network of recent graduates from diverse backgrounds, she began a quiet, unofficial survey. She found others, dozens, who had left Nexacore in the last 2 years after similar short, bewildering tenures. Their stories were identical. Initial excitement, then a sudden chilling of relations, followed by termination for vague cultural reasons. Many had signed non-disparagement agreements as part of their severance, silencing them. One former employee, a software engineer named Amir, agreed to talk on condition of anonymity. He'd been flagged in the system for excessive peer code review requests. The annotation read, "Overly collaborative slows team velocity, may indicate lack of independent confidence." He was let go 2 weeks later. "I was trying to learn," Amir said, his voice flat. "I thought asking questions was how you got better. They treated it like a disease." The story was building, but David Chase was not idle. The corporate machine had its own immune response. Security logs showed Liam's after-hours server access had triggered a low-priority alert. David, paranoid and ambitious, saw a threat. He did confront Liam directly. Instead, he initiated a routine financial audit of Liam's department, a common tactic to pressure and scrutinize. He also had the legal team draft a sweeping new confidentiality policy, requiring all employees to reaffirm their non-disclosure agreements with added clauses about data theft. The net was tightening. Silas knew they had to move from defense to offense. The archive was a bomb, but setting it off required the right moment. They needed to force the company into a public position, to make them deny the undeniable. Arthur Mill had an idea. The company's annual Future of Work symposium was in 2 weeks. The COO would be giving a keynote celebrating Nexacore's inclusive and data-driven talent culture. It was the perfect stage for a confrontation. The plan was high risk. Maya would attend as a guest, using an old alumni pass. She would publicly ask a question during the Q&A, quoting directly from the Shadow database's annotations. The goal wasn't to expose everything there, but to force a public, recorded denial. Once the COO declared such a system didn't exist, the release of the evidence would become a scandal of perjury, not just discrimination. The tension now split into 2 nerve-shredding countdowns. 1. Preparing Maya for her moment, arming her with the perfect, damning quote. 2. Protecting Liam as the audit noose began to close around his daily work. David started scheduling one-on-one check-ins with him, his questions veiled but menacing. "How system integrity, Liam? Everything backed up securely. No external vulnerabilities." The night before the symposium, Liam sent a panicked, encrypted message. David had requested full administrative logs for the Shadow database for the entire quarter. He was looking for the copy command. They had hours before he found the anomaly. Silas made a decision. They would trigger the plan early. He instructed Maya to not wait for the Q&A instead. She would approach a specific journalist, Isabel Vance, who was covering the symposium. Isabel had a reputation for tough tech reporting. They would give her a sliver of the story, just enough to ask her own, sharper question from the press pit. It was a dangerous escalation. They were bringing the media in before they had the company's public denial on record. It was a gamble that the evidence was shocking enough to blow past corporate spin. As Maya walked into the bustling convention center, the archive files hidden in a secure cloud, and Liam sat at his desk facing David's suspicious stare, the entire plan balanced on a knife's edge. All it would take was one wrong move, one moment of panic, and the truth would be buried forever, along with their futures. The symposium hall was a cathedral of corporate self-congratulation. 1,000 people bathed in the glow of a stage where the COO, Robert Sterling, was weaving a narrative of innovation and inclusion. Maya moved through the crowd like a ghost, her heart hammering against her ribs. She spotted Isabel Vance in the press section, her sharp features focused on a tablet. The approach was the hardest part. A tap on the shoulder, a frantic whisper over the ambient noise. "Ms. Vance, I have information about Nexacore's internal hearing algorithms. It's discriminatory. I have proof." Isabel's eyes flickered from skepticism to professional intensity in a second. "Who are you?" "I was fired yesterday. My grandfather is Silas Vance." That name changed everything. Isabel knew the legacy. She ushered Maya to a quiet alcove. "Show me." Maya pulled up a single screenshot on her phone, the investment risk dashboard with an annotation about head wraps and religious practice. Isabel's breath caught. "This is live now. The system is active. The COO is lying up there." Back in the office, the audit had become an interrogation. David had Liam in a glass-walled conference room, the logs displayed between them. "This data transfer at 2 a.m., Liam, to an external cloud address. Explain." Liam's mouth was dry. A backup test for disaster recovery. "We have a protocol for that, this isn't it?" David leaned forward. "Did someone ask you for data? A journalist? A competitor?" He was guessing, but his guess was terrifyingly warm. Liam's silence was an answer. David's phone buzzed. A notification from the symposium's live feed. He glanced at it, then back at Liam, a new, colder understanding dawning. "Wait here." On stage, Robert Sterling was taking questions. A few softballs about market strategy. Then Isabel Vance stood, microphone in hand. "Robert," Isabel Vance with the Chronicle, "you just spoke about Nexacore's data-driven commitment to removing bias. Can you confirm whether the company operates or has ever operated an internal system that flags employees, particularly from minority backgrounds, for cultural risk based on metrics like social habits or dress?" The room didn't go silent, it inhaled. Sterling's smile froze, then recalibrated into practiced bafflement. "I'm not familiar with any such system. Our people analytics are focused on performance and growth, always anonymized and ethical." "So you're denying the existence of a dashboard called Investment Risk Employee Tracking?" A ripple went through the crowd. Sterling's eyes darted to his aides offstage. "That doesn't sound like any authorized company tool. We'd never engage in profiling." It was the denial they needed, but the plan shattered in the next moment. From the side entrance, David Chase burst into the press area, followed by 2 corporate security officers. He pointed directly at Maya, who was standing beside Isabel. "That woman is a terminated employee trespassing and attempting to disseminate stolen, fabricated data." The security officers moved. Chaos erupted. Isabel shoved a thumb drive into Maya's hand. "Go, get out." Maya turned and ran, disappearing into the startled crowd as phones lifted to record the commotion. The story was now a live-streamed scandal, but it was spinning out of control. The headline was "Company Exposed." It was "Founder's Granddaughter Causes Disruption with Alleged Data Theft." The corporate PR machine shifted into overdrive, painting Maya as a disgruntled relative and Silas as a senile old man orchestrating a smear campaign. A statement was released within the hour. "We are appalled by the false allegations and the criminal theft of data." The individual in question was terminated for clear performance issues. "We are pursuing all legal remedies." This was the "it gets worse" moment. They had the truth, but the company was winning the narrative. Liam, seeing the news break on his phone in the conference room, made a desperate choice. While David was distracted, Liam used a master key he shouldn't have had to access the primary server room. He wasn't just going to let them delete everything. He initiated a full system lockout, triggering a cascade of cybersecurity alarms. His final act before security tackled him was to send a broadcast email to the entire company from the system admin account. The subject line: "The truth about investment risk." The body contained just 3 attachment links to the encrypted archive. Inside Nexacore pandemonium, thousands of employees received the email. The archive was now inside the firewall. People clicked. They read the annotations about their former colleagues. The internal chat systems exploded with shock and outrage. The story was no longer external media speculation. It was an internal civil war. Silas watched this unfold from his home, feeling the control slip away. His grandson was in custody. His granddaughter was fleeing security. The evidence was public, but it was being drowned in a wave of legal threats and character assassination. The company's board, finally roused, called an emergency session. But they didn't call Silas. They called their crisis management firm. The institutional machinery was designed to survive even this. Then came the second revelation, the one that changed the scope of everything. As tech-savvy employees dove into Liam's archive, they found something he hadn't even known about. The investment risk system wasn't a homegrown Nexacore tool. It was a white-labeled software suite called CultureFit AI, licensed from a shadowy third-party firm called Talos Analytics. And the data wasn't just for internal use. The license agreement showed that anonymized risk profiles and retention forecasts were being sent back to Talos to refine the predictive model. Nexacore wasn't just a perpetrator, it was a guinea pig. The discrimination was being productized. Talos was selling this system to dozens of other major corporations, promising to reduce cultural friction and optimize team cohesion. The scandal was no longer about one company's moral failure. It was about an entire industry standardizing bias under the guise of data science. The founder's fight was now a battle against a monster he never saw coming. With Liam arrested and Maya in hiding, Silas Vance stood alone in his study, staring at the Talos Analytics website. Their slogan glowed on his screen, "Building better teams by design." The evidence was overwhelming, but it was also vast, technical, and trapped in a whirlwind of legal chaos. The public saw a messy family feud. They didn't see the systemic cancer. To win, he had to stop playing the insider game. He had to speak not as a founder, but as a witness. He had to dismantle the legacy he built to save what it was meant to stand for. The boardroom coup was over. The real war for the soul of the workplace had just begun. Silas Vance didn't call a lawyer. He called a press conference. Not in a sleek corporate auditorium, but on the steps of the old garage where he'd founded Nexacore 50 years prior. The symbolism was brutal and deliberate. He stood alone. No podium, no teleprompter, just an old man in a worn sweater against a backdrop of peeling paint and memory. The cameras, drawn by the escalating scandal, showed up in droves. He didn't talk about lawsuits or board votes. He told a story. He spoke about building a company for his neighbors, for the kids who looked like him and were told they didn't belong in tech. He described the original hearing manual, which stated, "Competence has no culture." Then he held up a printout of the Talos Analytics CultureFit AI interface. "This," he said, his voice steady and clear, "is what they replaced that idea with. This is not an error, it is a product. And my company bought it." He then did the one thing the corporate crisis managers feared most. He apologized. Not for exposing the truth, but for letting the institution he created become a vessel for this poison. He apologized to every employee who had been flagged, tracked, and pushed out. He apologized to his granddaughter. And then he announced he was using his remaining founders' shares to file a derivative lawsuit against the current board and the Talos Corporation. Not for money, but for the complete dismantling of the system and the public release of all its algorithms for audit. The effect was seismic. The narrative of a bitter family feud evaporated. This was a founding father disowning his own legacy to save its soul. Employees, who had been simmering with the internal data, began to organize. A group of senior engineers released an open letter refusing to work on any product integrating Talos data. Then, the dominoes began to fall. First, Liam Park was released from custody. The district attorney, facing immense public pressure and the clarity of Silas's testimony, declined to prosecute, citing insufficient evidence of criminal intent and highlighting the whistleblower nature of the act. He was fired from Nexacore, but was immediately offered a position at a nonprofit focused on ethical AI by the end of the week. David Chase was placed on indefinite administrative leave. A week later, he resigned. The official statement cited a desire to pursue new opportunities, but internal emails later revealed the board had threatened to terminate him for cause after finding evidence he had personally approved the most egregious, racially tinged annotations in the system. His professional reputation was irreparably tarnished. The board of Nexicor, facing the derivative lawsuit, a plummeting stock price, and a full-blown employee revolt, had no choice. They settled with Silas. The terms were unprecedented. First, a complete permanent ban on using any third-party cultural fit or retention risk analytics. Second, the establishment of a $50 million restitution fund for identified victims of the system, administered by an independent panel. Third, a mandated restructuring of the board to include employee and community representative seats. And fourth, the public release of the Talos CultureFit algorithm source code. This last condition triggered the final, surprising domino. When the algorithm's code was published, a global community of data scientists and ethicists tore it apart. They found the bias wasn't just in the data Nexicor fed it. It was baked into the core architecture. The algorithm weighted social network proximity to management and linguistic similarity to company values documents, metrics that inherently favored the dominant group. The shocking detail was in the licensing paperwork. Over 70 major corporations, including household names in retail, finance, and manufacturing, were found to be Talos clients. Nexicor was just the tip of the spear. A class-action lawsuit against Talos Analytics consolidated within a month. Regulators from 3 federal agencies opened investigations. The story ceased to be about one intern's bad day and became a landmark case about the weaponization of data science. Maya Collins, her name cleared and her record expunged, declined an offer to return to Nexicor. Instead, she joined her grandfather's foundation, focusing on developing open-source, bias-auditing tools for hearing software. In a quiet ceremony, Silas and Maya returned to the branch where it began. The office was being remodeled, part of the company, refoundation. The glass walls of David Chase's old office were gone, replaced with an open collaboration space. The mission statement on the wall had been updated. It now read the original lines Silas had written decades ago: "Competence has no culture." The fight wasn't over. Talos was battling in court, and systemic bias doesn't die with one lawsuit. But the machine had been exposed, its blueprints laid bare for the world to see. The grandfather who watched from the boardroom hadn't just saved his granddaughter's career. He had sparked a fire that would force an entire industry to look in the mirror. The legacy he founded was no longer a company, but a warning, and a new standard for what accountability looks like when the cameras are finally turned on. The story of Nexicor is a blueprint. It shows how discrimination evolved from blunt force into something sleek, algorithmic, and defensible as data-driven management. What happened to Maya Collins in that office wasn't an anomaly. It was the output of a system designed to produce exactly that result while generating a clean paper trail. The real victory wasn't just a settlement or a resignation. It was the proof that these systems can be cracked open, that the code of bias can be debugged. But the question the Nexicor saga leaves us with is unsettling. If a company founded on explicit ideals of inclusion could be turned into a laboratory for bias, what does that say about every other workplace? The Talos algorithm didn't create prejudice. It monetized a prejudice that already existed in the whispers of culture fit and the unspoken rules of team harmony. It gave managers like David Chase a dashboard to justify their instincts, transforming personal bias into corporate policy. This is the frontier of civil rights in the digital age. It's no longer just about who gets hired, but about the invisible architecture that decides who gets to stay, who gets promoted, and who is deemed a risk before they ever prove their worth. The fight has moved from the lunch counter to the server rack. Sela's and Maya's story matters because it provides a playbook. Follow the data, find the human source of the bias feeding the machine, and force it into the light. The lingering question is whether these systems exist elsewhere. We now know they do. The question is who is watching, who has access to the boardroom cameras, not to spy, but to ensure accountability. The lesson is that oversight cannot be outsourced to the very algorithms it needs to police. It requires human courage, the Liam Parks who refuse to be silent cogs, the insiders who leak, the grandparents who are willing to dismantle their own monuments. In the end, this is a story about legacy. Not the legacy of a company, but the legacy we choose to build every day in our own spheres. Do we accept the smooth, efficient output of a biased system, or do we, like Silas Vance, choose the messy, difficult work of auditing our own foundations? The cameras are everywhere now. The real choice is what we do with the feed. If you found this deep dive into the hidden architecture of power compelling, make sure to subscribe. We unravel a new story every week, exposing the systems that shape our world and the people brave enough to challenge them. Thanks for watching.